Hi, welcome to CreepGame Assignment 2.04. For this assignment we're going to create a debug menu and add that to our game. The debug menu will be activated by pressing the backtick tilde key. We're going to provide a cursor on the debug menu to indicate the current highlighted item. We are going to add at least 3 widgets, namely checkboxes, buttons, sliders. We're going to focus on making our API easy to use. We're going to remove functionality in release builds. One of the functions that our debug menu will have is an ability to preview loaded textures that are textures already loaded into the game. And we'll also have the ability to create lines, spheres, and boxes so that we can debug shapes and stuff in the game. Alright, let's take a look. Start the game up. Get it all going. Okay, let's press the tilde key, bring up the debug menu, and here's our debug menu. First I'll show the cursor by pressing on the down arrows, and you'll see the cursor moving between the different widgets that we've added, and it can also move up. Okay, so the top widget is this font size widget. By pressing on the right arrow, we can increase the font size in our debug menu. That's pretty cool, right? So let's now go down to the required slider widget here, which will show the textures we've loaded into the game. It also shows the size of the textures, 1024 by 1024 for this clown. And by the way, this clown is what's being used on the ball and the paddles, but with that shader on, it's a little hard to tell. Okay, so there's one of our textures. There's our water world texture, and there's the outside of that water world box texture. And you'll notice that that is showing an aspect ratio that's not square. And what we can do is move down to this checkbox here, keep texture aspect ratio, and we can turn that off, and you'll see there it is in a square version of it, or we can just turn it back on. So we'll leave that on, and let's look at the rest of the textures. So there's the texture we had used previously for the Pong table, and there's a white, probably just a white pixel, yeah, 1 by 1, that can be used. Okay, so let's go down to our other debug menu items here, widgets. Here's another checkbox. Enable the 1-second travel vector. So this demonstrates the use of a debug line in our game. And so if for some reason we thought maybe that we were having a problem with visualizing where the ball was heading at each time, we could just add that 1-second debug line to it. Anyhow, what it really does though is demonstrate we can add a line anywhere in the game now that we have it in the render for debug purposes. Now let's add a Debug Sphere to the ball. You can see that's been added. And then we'll also turn on a Debug Box. Now what I'm going to do is exit the debug menu by pressing tilde again. I'm going to get back to the top view, and I'm going to tell it to center the camera on the ball as we had done previously. And this allows us to look a little better. I'm going to pause the game by pressing the space bar. And now pressing the B key will let me, the V key will let me zoom in a little bit. Can't zoom in all the way though, because I eventually hit the near plane of my camera. So there we go. So we can see now we have the all the debug shapes on our ball here. So let's turn off the box, and now you can see the sphere a little better. And we'll turn off the sphere, and there's our ball in the center. And now we turn off the line. So you can see we've satisfied the requirement for all those debug shapes. Okay, so let's take a look at some code. Okay, so we wanted to make it pretty simple to add widgets. So here's some example of adding 3 checkbox widgets. Notice that all we do is basically supply some kind of nice readable description for it, and we pass it a pointer to a Boolean value that we own. And what the widget does is, as the user checks the box or unchecks it, it changes the value of this Boolean value, and somewhere else in our code, every frame, we look at that value and take an action depending on whether it's true or false. And so we do that for all these 3. And now let's take a look at a texture widget. So here's a texture widget. Basically just has a name. It says how many textures there are, and an array and a pointer to an array of the textures. Now notice here there's really nothing we need to act on every frame. We just pass it all the stuff, and once we've done that, the texture widget from then on, based on interactions from the user by going that slider or on the checkbox that keeps the aspect ratio, it's basically self-contained from now on. We don't have to react to it anymore. And also notice this widget this texture widget causes two widgets to appear on the screen, namely the slider and that aspect ratio bar. I think it's the only one that does that. Okay, let's take a look at a slider widget. So here's how we create a slider widget. Once again, it has a name. We tell it the minimum value we want for the slider, the maximum value we want for the slider, the number of ticks in the slider, in other words, the number of things or values that can be represented. And here's a pointer to a float variable. And so basically we pass all this to that slider, and as the user interacts with the slider, that float value will change. So somewhere else in our code we're going to have something that observes that float value every frame and takes action depending on what the value is. Okay, so that's an example of shown an example of our widgets, and that completes my overview for the CreepGame Assignment 2.04. Thank you and goodbye.